So I am Janelle Carranza, and I am the sacred organizer at Covenant Presbyterian, but I'm also part of the design team for both Multnomah County East and Washington County, because both are my homes and I love them both deeply. But with that, also shout out to my heartbeat holders because they are amazing and I love them to death. It is thanks to them that this work has been very fruitful. But I also really want to name and give us some very basic and like very basic bare bones on what a house meeting is. And also naming that a house meeting is our step towards building that collective power. A house meeting is an expanded reflection on our one-on-one conversations and group conversations and moving towards building that collective power. This is where we start connecting our self-interest into collective interest. And house meetings are my absolute favorite, my favorite part of this whole process. Because we just come from a season of having so many one-on-one conversations, sacred encounters, connections. And it's at this point in me, after having so many one-on-one conversations and connecting with people and having so many conversations, that things are bubbling within me, where I start getting frustrated on different conversations that I'm having. I'm feeling all these emotions. I'm having all these questions. And all these things I can physically feel it inside my body. And it is through this, then I start asking these questions on what are the stories that I'm hearing? What are the questions that are rising, right? And this is where we get to reconnect with the people that we had our one-on-one conversations with. And we see them come around these questions, right? And we start to connect with people that are feeling very similar to me after our one-on-one conversations. Things are bubbling within them too. So we get together and we have a conversation. And we start to go beyond ourselves. So people that maybe hadn't connected before get to connect in this space. I had a one-on-one conversation with 5 people, but those 5 people haven't met yet. And they don't know that there's this thread linking us together. And so then we get together in this room, and that common thread is now pulling us together in this physical space. And I start to go outside of just myself and all these questions and emotions that I'm feeling. And we come together into this one physical space, and I physically see the power coming together. For me, it's a very moment. Oh, this is all of us together in this room. We're feeling very similarly. And you get to see the people that had a similar conversation or have similar questions or similar pressures or similar values or similar dreams. And it all suddenly makes sense and it all connects and it all feels worth it. And this is where we start feeling, okay, like where is this going to go? We are no longer alone. We're moving from I feel seen to I feel held by my community. A house meeting is coming together after one-on-ones and naming the questions and threads that weave us and tie us together. A house meeting is also checking with ourselves too. It makes us question, what have I been hearing around in my conversations? And who are the people that I'm bringing into this space? Are they the right people that I want to be in this space, that I want to have a conversation around this? Where is the energy, right? Is there energy around this? And then what a house meeting is not, you want to go to our next slide, is it shouldn't be a new conversation. So you shouldn't go into your house meeting being, what are we going to talk about? Because we should know what we're going to talk about because we've had so many one-on-ones, right? And there's a common thread or theme that we're hearing, and that's what we want to talk about in our house meetings. So if you're going into your house meeting feeling like it's new, then we need to go back to our one-on-one conversations and think about, what did I hear? Who do I want to reconnect with, right? What's going to bubble inside of me? It's also not hierarchical. It's not a workshop, right? We're all together and we're walking alongside one another around stories. And it's not a teaching moment, right? It's like hey, these are the conversations that I'm hearing, right? And I've noticed that this is resonant within all of us too. Let's come together and have a good conversation around this. And then maybe identify what our next steps are going to be. It's also not stiff or performative. It's going to be very relational. It's going to be very comfortable. It's also not just a nice dinner with friends. It's not just a get together. It's a very strategic meeting when you talk about the things that you've heard. When I go to our next slide, but what's also the point of house meetings? A house meeting is a chance to expand our capacity, right? Going back to it no longer feels like just me, now it's us at both the micro and the macro level. It brings questions on who are the leaders that I'm accompanying? What is the collective dream that we're holding and working towards together? And it's also a chance to really test out our turnout strategy of if I invite someone into this conversation, who's going to show up for this? Who has dreams and wants to be around this, right? Who has a want and a need to be physically here and present with the conversations that have been happening? With that, I'm going to pass it over to Jake.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Janelle. I realized I didn't introduce myself. My name is Jake. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the heartbeat holder out in Washington County. And we are actually in the middle of our house meeting campaign right now. And so thank you so much, Janelle. I think that that really embodies what we are trying to do right now out in Washington County. So before we begin our next section, I just invite you to think about what Janelle said. Maybe take a deep breath. Think about all the one-to-ones you might have had over the last few months and who you might want to pull together for a collective conversation. We want to make sure that you do not feel alone in these. And like Janelle said, these house meetings should actually be pretty simple. If you've been doing the one-to-ones correctly, you should be already noticing some bubbling up of what is happening in the community. And so here is a sample outline of an agenda. We will send one out to you after this meeting in a lot more detail so that you just need to plug in your context into this outline. For the next few minutes here, I'm just going to go through it all with you though, so that you know what to kind of ask and expect as you all are setting up your house meetings. First, right at the top, highlighted, you'll notice house meeting name, which isn't so important, but date, time, and location. This is really important as we think about the community that we're holding and how to make these house meetings accessible to them. I know that this was really big for you, Janelle, as you were planning your house meeting, and I'm curious if you're willing to speak about how date, time, and location played a role as you organized your house meeting.
Yeah, so a lot of the people that I actually talked to were people that have 9-to-5 jobs. So me scheduling something in the middle of the day was just not going to work out. But I also have people that were social workers. Social workers. And a lot of their schedules had varied so much. And it didn't feel right for me to just name a place and a date and expect them to show up. So it's all like, hey friend, when are you available? But then also the place was really important to me because I knew them all from either growing up or working with them. So we ended up having my house meeting at my house because it was really comfortable for everyone and I knew everyone. And we also don't come from a church background. So all the people that I invited actually don't go to a church. And so that would have been really awkward for them to kind of show up to a church and not feel very welcomed. I feel like that didn't really set the mood for what we were hoping to have conversation around. So I know that was a huge conversation for me on where do you want to have our place? What time?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Janelle. It's something so simple as just the time, date, and location, but it can really set the tone for the conversation you're going to have. And if we're serious about centering the conversations that we're having, then asking some of those questions beforehand of should this be at a church or someone's house, what time, those types of things can really make an impact on who shows up and who feels accessible and welcome in that space. The second part that you'll notice is the theme. And this is something that Janelle already touched on, but this should be pretty simple. It should come out of your one-to-ones. And I'm curious right now, as you think about the one-to-ones you've had, what are some potential themes born out of your relational encounter that are already coming up in your community that you'd be curious to bring into a larger conversation? And go ahead and throw those in the chat. Awesome. Josh Kingsley says, aging without resources. So that's a common theme in Josh's one-to-ones that he's noticing might require a bigger conversation, might lead to something larger. Lexi says, spaces to grieve. Definitely, there's a lot to grieve. I'd be curious about what specifically you're hearing, Lexi, and how to tie that more closely together. Working people still not making rent. That's huge. Schools knowing of families unable to pay heat or rent. Yeah, specifically at the intersections then of those who are interacting with those communities, for sure. Neighbors on our block living outdoors. Stressing about money. Awesome, keep throwing these in the chat. This kind of goes to show though that y'all already know the conversations. Y'all have already done the work to surface what's on people's heart, more than just your own. Go ahead and move to the next slide, Rita. The next thing you'll notice, other than arrival and refreshments and welcome and introductions, which is standard for all of our gatherings, is the framing. This is really important. This is the point in the agenda that connects the overarching question that you're asking to the people. Many people are going to show up to these house meetings expecting like, oh, what are you going to provide for us? And this is a time to go, no, this is born out of the conversations we've had. This isn't us providing something for you so much as all of us coming together around something that I've seen through my organizing practice. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The next parts you'll see is the grounding, and you'll see that I've highlighted grounding along with next steps, reflection and evaluation, and closing. This is an excellent opportunity for leadership development. As Janelle said, house meetings are an awesome time to build capacity, and that doesn't just mean numbers. That means that we're also building up leaders at every step of the way as well. And if this is a conversation with the community that feels this most directly, then what an amazing opportunity to say, we want you to reclaim your agency and take center stage in these meetings as well. So I'm curious, as you think about these issues or these themes that you've named in the chat, such as fear of houseless people, aging without resources, our houseless crisis with our neighbors, who are some of the leaders in those conversations that you would want to raise up, that you would want to accompany into learning some of these facilitation skills and organizing skills? And go ahead and throw their names in the chat. I think that there's a tendency when we are hosting an event to want to control all of it instead of relying on the community and the expansiveness that we know already exists, to trust the leadership and wisdom in the room. Awesome. Keep throwing those names in the chat. And we're going to go move on to the next slide. The next part is possibly the most important part of the evening, which is the story. As with most of our house meetings, we center the wisdom of the room. We are not here to tell you what to do or next steps, or that we have all the answers. We simply have a set of practices that might surface the wisdom that already exists. And the story is the point at which we set an example of that. This is often someone who is directly connected to the theme of the evening and requires the most accompaniment, as it is one of the most vulnerable pieces as well in the house meeting. Questions you should be asking when thinking about this part is there a story that struck you in your one-to-ones or felt particularly resonant for this group to hear? From there, like I said, requires a lot of accompaniment. How are you going to help this leader feel confident in telling that story publicly? And as well as the debrief afterwards. How did that feel for them? What parts did they wish that they went deeper? What parts felt a little sticky? What parts felt too vulnerable, possibly? Next slide.
Oh, Jake, before we go to the next slide too,
Yeah.
something I wanted to add that I remembered
Go.
is that when you and me were talking about our leaders for story, is that we were very strategic in who we asked to be in that space. Remember, I specifically asked one leader to share, and he was very comfortable sharing. But I know that him sharing his story and who he was, and the way that he shared his story, would bring out two other people in that room to get into their story and feel more connected too. I just wanted to name that too.
Definitely. Thank you, Janelle. Yeah, this really is a key piece. Who is going to be most strategic to tapping into other people's story as well? Last piece is the one-to-ones. So just as we have someone come up in a storyteller position in our house meetings, we honor that story by connecting it to our own. They're not the only ones sharing out of their vulnerability. We recognize that our liberation is intrinsically bound together, and that if we don't see our own story in that, that can quickly become problematic. And so we ask very strategic one-to-one questions to harvest some of that collective wisdom. And after those one-to-ones, we pick a good facilitator. This is not a time for beginners to start to surface out of those one-to-ones what we were hearing. What were some of the themes we're noticing? What were some of those common threads, those systems of oppression that we might all be feeling together? And so with that, that is the entire agenda for the evening. We hope that you feel more comfortable with what a house meeting is and how it's structured. And really after that, all it is turnout. That if we have the agenda, if we have the people, if we have the theme as we've named in the chat, then all it is making the invite. And so with that, I'm going to invite Jules up, who might ask some more strategic questions that get us deeper into it.
Thank you so much, Jake and Janelli, for that really deep teaching on house meetings. So friends, what we're going to do, I want you to take a moment and think about what Janelli and Jake have just shared with us. House meetings are a venerated and well-practiced way for us to begin to weave together the stories and encounters we've had. I want you to think of any questions, simple to complex, that arise for you about what was just shared. So take a moment and do that. And I'm going to ask the room for some things, but first I'm going to ask Jake and Janelli some questions as you're thinking. All right. So, Jake, Janelli, as you were talking, I was thinking about the question of a house meeting. Like, it kind of centers around a story and a question and a conversation. And you all have had a couple of house meetings just this week where this is really fresh for you. You've done it with Christchurch and the Queer Resource Center in Washington County. You've done it, I believe, with the Latinx community in Washington County, and you have some coming up as well. How did you really nail down the question? How do you know what to really ask and to make it tight? How do you do that? What did you learn?
Do you want to start, Janelli, or?
One of the things that I want to say with nailing down my question that was really helpful is talking to my heartbeat holders, because I'm not a concrete person. I had all these ideas coming, and it took me a while. I sat down with Jake for 15, maybe 20 minutes on what is the question I'm going to ask. These are all the conversations that I had, and I don't know what the question is. And Jake's like, well, let's thread it, right? So for me, in my process of getting a concrete question is really sitting down with someone else and reflecting with them on, okay, these are the questions, these are the things that came up in my one-on-ones. How am I gonna simmer that into a question? And then my question started rising on Latinx and feeling enoughness, but then also feeling enough within our own home and our own context.
Jake, would you add anything to that? Thanks, Janelli.
Yeah, I think there comes a point once you've had enough one-to-ones, for me at least, in planning some of mine, specifically with the WQRC in Christchurch, where you start to feel it burning up in yourself. Like, oh, like I need to talk to someone about this. And then reflecting back on all the one-to-ones you have and being like, so where does this burning resonate with the burning in someone else? And then you start to list all those people. And I see a question in there in the chat that says, what is the ideal size? I would say once you feel that question resonating with 6 to 20 people, no more than 20, no less than 6, you should probably start thinking about a house meeting.
That's awesome. Thank you for answering that question. I'm seeing Violet's asking, like, how long should these meetings take? What's the ideal meeting length? it looks like from the agenda that you shared, it's about 90 minutes. It's not that long. Would you adjust that at all? Does it depend on the population of people you're talking with? How do you think about the length?
I can go ahead and answer and see if you want to add anything, Janelli. But I think 90 minutes is the perfect length. There's a tendency when it is a really burning question to want to go, oh, we could talk about this all night. But a part of house meetings is building up that energy towards something bigger, towards a bigger action. And you don't want to burn out all that energy in one night. You just want to surface it so that there's a fire lit to carry you through the rest of the organizing season. So 90 minutes is about the right time to do that. I'm curious if you'd add anything, Janelli.
No, for me, 90 minutes has been feeling really good. That's kind of what I planned for. And also something I wanted to add is that you could have more than one house meeting. Like we had 3 in Washington County and we had 4 in East County, right? And so you can have multiple house meetings if multiple questions are coming up, or if you feel like that time is just not enough, then let's make another one because there's obviously something else happening. And that's okay.
I love that idea that you can like go with the momentum, see how many folks are really in it, and then keep building on that. One of the questions I was ruminating on while you all were talking was, okay, and you started to touch on this, but okay, so I've done all these one-to-ones. I hosted a house meeting. Yay. I had 15 people. They were all burning about the same pressures and ready to do something. Now what? What do I do with all of that? Where do I go? Who do I tell about what's I just discovered? What's the next step?
I can go ahead and answer about Janelli and then you can add. I think there are multiple different pathways, a choose your own adventure, if you will. Sometimes in a house meeting, you start to surface really clear next steps with other organizing practices. For example, you start to realize that one organization, one system, or one person is holding the power over. At which point the next step would be, we need to host a research meeting to get to know more about this person, organization, or entity. That's a clear next step. Sometimes it isn't so clear. Sometimes it's a little muddy. And maybe you need to go back to your one-to-ones to see what's surfacing again, or host another house meeting with different people to start to surface some of that as well. As Janelli said, building capacity is a huge reason for house meetings. And usually once the spark lights at the first house meeting, people want to invite other people. So giving them a space to get new ideas, fresh stories in, can also spark some of that. Janelli?
Something too that I wanted to name that that as you were talking came up for me is after you have your storytellers and then your one-on-ones and you start doing your harvesting, so many times we have questions that come into that space. You start asking yourself, okay, how do we get to that question of, well, what can we do, right? So what's happening right now? Let's do research on what's happening right now. And also identifying who are someone that we want to talk to too, right? It's an elected official that just happens to be a neighbor down the street. I'm like, hey, let's get them connected. They're in the neighborhood. We should talk and see their thoughts. Or it might be just getting someone else in the room, being like, hey, actually, I know this person. Let's have another house meeting. I want to have a follow-up conversation with them to know what they're thinking. It's also a place to share ideas on where next steps could potentially be and what you're curious about together.
I think that's super helpful. I'm noticing Beth asked a really good question in the chat about okay, and I'm going to interpret this, but Beth, so hopefully I'll get it right. Let me know in the chat if I'm not. So you've had a bunch of one-to-ones, not just an individual, but the group, you know, you're in a core team or you're in a community all having encounters, and there's some intuition bubbling, right? Call a house meeting. Does the house meeting clarify for you your intuition, or is it only a confirmation? Like, how do you think about like what a house meeting does when you think you know what's already happening in your community? Does that question make sense? Like, Is it both and? Is it only one thing? How do you think about like what a house meeting can do for you? And are there multiple avenues to?
My internet is not very stable. Could you try to say that one more time, please?
Sure. Are there multiple ways you can use a house meeting? One, to clarify a question. Two, to start to just thread things together. Are house meetings flexible, or is it only for one thing?
Are you asking me, or is this just?
No, I'm asking the presenters.
Okay.
I want to give you the opportunity to speak, Janelle. I've gone first a lot, but I'm happy to lead us if you want.
Yeah, so a house meeting is flexible and it's supposed to be flexible and things are going to come out of it. So it's okay to schedule another house meeting. It's okay to schedule another one. And it's okay to ask questions outside of it too. So, do you want to add on to that? I lost my train of thought for a second.
No, you're good. I think to answer your question, Jules, a lot of house meetings can answer a lot of questions, such as, is the question, the communal question that I'm hearing, is that the right one? Is there energy behind it? Is there urgency? The other question that it answers is, are the people that I'm organizing actually going to turn out for something like this? Turnout strategy is huge. There might be energy, but if only 5 people show up, then that's pretty telling. And so I remember, Janelle, you were talking about house meetings as kind of a checkpoint. That's exactly what I use it for, is it's a checkpoint to gauge, am I building power in the right direction, or do I need to change the question or change the leaders? Hopefully too, a house meeting will surface a whole bunch of questions in a good way. House meetings are usually the point at which you're like, this is really important, but I don't know where else to go. So you invite the wisdom of the room, surface a bunch more questions, and then you start moving there together as opposed to alone.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to stop us there. We have, I'm sure, more questions. What I will say to the room is, you have a heartbeat holder. You have an Alyssa, a Jake, Sarah, an Anna. You have lots of folks on your design team, your companion for your core team. If you're like, I'm still a little bit worried about this, those are the folks to talk about this with and to talk to, and they'll be able to help make sure that this is just an easy and exciting process and an opportunity to generate like the information that you've never thought you could get from your neighbors and your community before.